The telegram that arrived on that scorching July morning in 1883 carried only 7 words, but they were enough to strip Margaret Nolan of everything she had ever known. Margaret stood on the front porch of her family's sprawling ranch house outside Denver, Colorado, her fingers trembling as she read the message for the 3rd time. Her father's handwriting was harsh, the letters carved deep into the paper as though his fury had transferred through the telegraph operator's hand. "You are no longer our daughter, Father." She had known this moment would come. 3 weeks earlier, when she had stood in the parlor of their Denver estate and refused Horace Pemberton's proposal of marriage, she had seen the rage building in her father's face like a summer storm gathering on the plains. Horace Pemberton, with his railroad money and political connections, with his silk waistcoats and perfectly groomed mustache, had represented everything her father wanted for the family. An alliance with the Pembertons would have elevated the Nolans from successful ranchers to genuine aristocracy in Colorado's rapidly growing society. But Margaret had looked into Horace's cold gray eyes during their courtship and seen nothing but calculation. He did not want a wife. He wanted an ornament, a properly trained woman who would host his dinner parties and produce his heirs, and never question where he spent his evenings or with whom. When he had finally proposed, kneeling in the rose garden with a diamond ring that cost more than most families earned in a year, she had felt her future closing in around her like a coffin. "No," she had said simply, and watched his face transform from confident expectation to disbelief to fury. Her father had given her a week to reconsider. When she refused again, he had sent her to the ranch with orders to think about her duty to her family. She had spent 3 weeks working alongside the ranch hands, helping with the horses, learning the daily rhythms of ranch life that had always been kept carefully separate from her world of drawing rooms and social calls. And now this telegram had arrived, making her exile permanent. Margaret was 22 years old, and she owned nothing but the simple cotton dress she wore, and the horse her father had not yet bothered to reclaim. The ranch foreman, a weathered man named Tom who had worked for her father for 15 years, approached the porch with his hat in his hands. "Miss Nolan," he said quietly, "I received a telegram too. I am to send you away. Your father says you are not to take anything that belongs to the family." "I understand," Margaret said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "May I keep my horse? Juniper was a gift for my 16th birthday." "I consider her mine." Tom looked relieved. "Your father did not mention the horse specifically. As far as I know, she is yours." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "This is not much, but it is my savings from the past year. You will need money." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Tom, I cannot take your money. You can and you will," Tom said firmly. "Your father is wrong to do this. You showed courage standing up for yourself. Not many women would." He pressed the pouch into her hands. "There is a town called Oatman in Arizona Territory. My brother runs a general store there. It is rough country, but if you tell him I sent you, he will help you find work. Women are scarce out there, and honest work can be found if you are not afraid of it." "I am not afraid," Margaret said, and realized it was true. Terrified, yes, uncertain about everything that lay ahead, but not afraid of work, not afraid of starting over. "Thank you, Tom. I will repay you someday." "Just make a good life for yourself," Tom said. "That will be payment enough." 2 hours later, Margaret rode away from the only home she had ever known. She had a horse, a saddle, the clothes on her back, Tom's money pouch containing $37, a canteen of water, and a bundle of food wrapped in cloth. The Rocky Mountains rose behind her, purple and magnificent in the distance. Ahead lay a journey of more than 600 miles to Arizona Territory, through some of the most unforgiving landscape in the West. She had no idea how she would make the journey. She had never traveled alone, had never spent a night under the open sky, had never had to worry about where her next meal would come from. But as she turned Juniper south and felt the morning sun on her face, Margaret felt something unexpected blooming in her chest alongside the fear and grief. Freedom. The first week of travel taught Margaret more about hardship than her entire privileged upbringing. She followed the main road south, keeping to herself, speaking to no one beyond necessary transactions at the small trading posts where she bought supplies. At night, she slept under the stars or in the shelter of rock formations, always with one hand on the knife Tom had pressed into her hands at the last moment. She learned to make coffee over a small fire, though it was bitter and full of grounds. She learned to sleep lightly, waking at every sound. She learned that her body was stronger than she had ever imagined, capable of long days in the saddle, capable of enduring heat and cold and the constant uncertainty of the road. By the time she crossed into New Mexico territory, she was sunburned and dusty, her hair tangled despite her efforts to keep it braided. Her dress was torn at the hem. She looked nothing like the refined young woman who had left Denver. She looked like a survivor. It was in a small town called Socorro that Margaret's money ran out. She had been careful, but supplies cost money, and feed for Juniper cost money, and the journey had taken longer than expected. She sold her saddle for $10, riding bareback afterward with only a blanket between her and Juniper's warm hide. When that money ran out 3 days later, she knew she had to find work. The next town was little more than a collection of buildings scattered along a dry riverbed. A faded sign identified it as Magdalena. Margaret rode down the single dusty street, noting the cantina, the livery stable, the general store. A hand-painted sign in the window of a small building caught her attention. Cook needed. The building turned out to be a boarding house, run by a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Chen, who had come from California during the gold rush and stayed on when her husband died. Mrs. Chen looked Margaret up and down with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You look like you have been on the road a long time," Mrs. Chen said. "Yes, madam," Margaret replied. "I am traveling to Arizona territory, but I need to earn some money before I can continue." "Can you cook?" Margaret hesitated. She had learned the basics during her weeks at the ranch, working in the kitchen alongside the cook, but her skills were limited. "I can learn," she said finally. "I am a hard worker." Mrs. Chen studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "You can work for me for 2 weeks. I will give you meals and a place to sleep and $5 at the end. That is the best I can offer." "I accept," Margaret said. "Thank you." The next 2 weeks were the hardest physical labor Margaret had ever done. She rose before dawn to start the fires and cook breakfast for the boarding house residents, mostly miners and ranch hands passing through. She cleaned rooms, washed linens in the big copper tub out back, scrubbed floors on her hands and knees. Mrs. Chen was demanding but fair, showing Margaret how to cook simple meals that could feed a crowd, how to make a little meat stretch with beans and cornmeal, how to bake bread in the temperamental oven. At night, Margaret fell into her narrow bed in the tiny room off the kitchen, too exhausted even to dream. But she was earning her way honestly, and there was satisfaction in that. On her last evening in Magdalena, Margaret sat on the back steps of the boarding house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. Mrs. Chen came out and sat beside her, handing her a cup of coffee. "You did good work," Mrs. Chen said. "You could stay on if you wanted." "I could use the help." Margaret was tempted. The work was hard but honest, and Mrs. Chen was kind in her stern way. But something pulled her south toward the unknown. Thank you, but I need to keep moving. I am looking for something. I will know it when I find it. Mrs. Chen nodded as though she understood. Take this, she said, pressing a small bundle into Margaret's hands. Extra food for the road and this. She handed Margaret a battered but serviceable saddle. A man left it here 2 years ago and never came back for it. You need it more than he does now. Margaret's throat tightened. You have already been so generous. Women have to help each other in this country, Mrs. Chen said simply. The men do not make it easy for us. With $7 in her pocket, fresh supplies, and a saddle for Juniper, Margaret rode out of Magdalena the next morning. The landscape grew drier and more dramatic as she continued south and west, great mesas rising from the desert floor, canyons cutting deep into rust-red earth. She passed through small settlements and vast empty stretches where she saw no one for days. It was on one of those empty stretches, 3 weeks after leaving Magdalena, that Margaret ran into trouble. She had stopped to water Juniper at a small creek when 3 men rode over the rise. Margaret knew immediately, from the way they spread out to block her escape route, that this was not a friendly encounter. Her heart began to pound, but she kept her expression calm, her hand moving slowly toward the knife at her belt. "Well, well," said the man in the middle, a tall figure with a scarred face and cruel eyes. "What do we have here? A lady traveling all alone. That is not safe, miss." "I am fine, thank you," Margaret said, keeping her voice steady. "I will be on my way." "Now, do not be unfriendly," the man said, dismounting. The other 2 followed suit. "We could keep you company. Make sure you stay safe." "I prefer to travel alone," Margaret said. She was calculating distances, possibilities. She could not outrun 3 mounted men, but if she could get back on Juniper quickly enough, she might have a chance. The scarred man stepped closer. "That is not very neighborly. Leave her alone, Tate." The new voice came from behind the 3 men. Margaret looked up to see a rider sitting his horse on the ridge above the creek. The sun was behind him, making him a dark silhouette against the bright sky, but she could see the rifle resting across his saddle. Tate spun around, his hand moving to his gun. "This is none of your concern, stranger." "I am making it my concern," the man said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath. "The lady wants to be left alone. You 3 are going to get back on your horses and ride away now." "There are 3 of us and 1 of you," Tate said. "I know," the man replied. "Seems unfair, does it not? But I am the one with the rifle already in my hands, and you are the one who has to clear leather, so let us not find out who is faster." For a long moment, nobody moved. Margaret held her breath, her hand tight on her knife. Then Tate laughed, but it was an ugly sound without humor. "This is not over." "Yes, it is," the man said. "Ride away now, or I will put a bullet in your horse. Then you will have a long walk back to wherever you came from." Tate glared at Margaret as though this was somehow her fault, then stalked back to his horse. The 3 men rode away north, looking back several times. The stranger stayed on the ridge until they were out of sight, then rode down to the creek. In full light, Margaret could see him clearly for the first time. He was perhaps 25 years old, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly under his hat. His eyes were a startling light blue, standing out against his tanned face. He wore dusty range clothes, practical and well-worn, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in the saddle and in the wild country. "Are you all right, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Yes," Margaret said. "Thank you. I do not know what would have happened if you had not come along." "Nothing good," he said honestly. "Those were bad men. I have seen them before in Tucson. They prey on travelers." He touched the brim of his hat. "Name is Samuel Grant. Friends call me Sam." "Margaret Nolan," she replied. I am traveling to Oatman. Sam's eyebrows rose. Oatman? That is still 150 miles west of here, rough country between here and there. So I am learning, Margaret said wryly. Sam studied her for a moment and she saw something in his expression shift. You have been on the road a long time, he said. It was not a question. Yes. Alone. Yes. That takes courage, Sam said quietly. Most women would not dare. Most men would think twice. Margaret felt unexpected tears prick her eyes at the simple acknowledgement. She blinked them back. Sometimes courage is just another word for having no other choice. Maybe, Sam said, but you had a choice. You could have stayed wherever you came from, accepted whatever life was being offered to you. You chose this instead. That is courage. He glanced up at the sun. I am headed west myself, toward the Arizona border. If you do not mind some company, I would be glad to ride with you. Those three might come back, especially after dark. Margaret knew she should be cautious. She did not know this man. But she also knew that she had just been rescued from a dangerous situation, and the road ahead was long and dangerous. And there was something in Sam's eyes, a steadiness and honesty that made her want to trust him. I would appreciate the company, she said. They rode together through the afternoon, following the creek west. Sam proved to be an easy companion, comfortable with silence but also willing to talk. He told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, learning to work cattle and break horses. His parents had died in a fever outbreak when he was 19, and he had sold the ranch, unable to work it alone. Since then, he had been drifting, working as a cowhand, taking jobs where he could find them. I have been thinking about Arizona Territory, Sam said as they made camp that evening. I hear there are opportunities there for a man willing to work hard. Land is still cheap in some places. A man could build something. That is what I am hoping too, Margaret said. Though I suppose for a woman the opportunities are different. Sam looked at her across the small fire he had built. You could teach, cook, run a boarding house. Plenty of things a smart woman can do. How do you know I am smart? Margaret asked, somewhat amused. You are alive, Sam said simply. You made it this far alone. That takes intelligence as much as courage. They talked late into the night, and Margaret found herself telling Sam about Denver, about her family, about Horace Pemberton and her refusal and her father's disowning of her. She had not spoken about it to anyone, and the words poured out like water from a broken dam. Sam listened without interrupting, his face serious in the firelight. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Your father was wrong, he said finally. A parent should want their child to be happy, not just advantageously married. And you were right to refuse a man you could not love. My father would say I was selfish, Margaret said, that I put my own feelings above the good of the family. Maybe some things are more important than family good, Sam said. Like being able to look at yourself in the mirror, like knowing you did not sell yourself for money and social position. You understand, Margaret said, surprised by the relief she felt. My father used to say that courage is doing the right thing even when it costs you everything, Sam said. You did that. Your courage inspires me. Margaret felt something shift in her chest at those words. She looked at Sam across the fire and saw him looking back at her with an expression she could not quite read. Something warm and tentative, like the first green shoots of spring after a long winter. Thank you, she said softly. They traveled together for the next 2 weeks, falling into an easy partnership. Sam taught Margaret things about surviving in the desert, how to find water, how to read the weather in the shape of clouds, how to tell which plants were safe to eat. Margaret shared what little she knew, the things she had learned in her weeks of travel and work. But more than the practical knowledge, they shared stories and dreams and fears. Sam talked about wanting to build something lasting, a ranch where he could raise horses, maybe start a family someday. Margaret talked about wanting independence, the freedom to make her own choices, to live a life that was truly hers. "You think those two things are compatible?" Margaret asked one evening as they watched the sun set over a landscape of twisted juniper trees and red stone. "Independence and family. I think they should be," Sam said. "I think two people could build a life together where both are free to be themselves. It would take the right people, though. People who respected each other." He looked at her as he said it, and Margaret felt her heart skip. Something was growing between them, had been growing since that first day by the creek. She felt it in the way Sam looked at her, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he made sure she had the best spot by the fire at night. And she felt it in herself, in the way she looked forward to hearing his voice in the morning, the way her day felt brighter when he smiled at her. She had never felt this way about Horace Pemberton. That courtship had been all surface and performance, carefully orchestrated meetings in proper settings with chaperones hovering nearby. This was different. This was real, but she was also afraid. She had just escaped one situation where marriage would have meant giving up her freedom. She did not want to make another mistake, even with someone she was coming to care for deeply. They crossed into Arizona territory on a bright October morning. The landscape changed, becoming even more dramatic, with towering rock formations and vast expanses of desert. Sam pointed out the distinctive outline of mountains in the distance. "Oatman is in those mountains," he said. "Gold country. There will be miners and prospectors, saloons and brothels, all the usual frontier chaos." "It sounds rough," Margaret said. "It is," Sam said. "But there will also be opportunities, and Tom's brother will help you get established. You will be all right." The way he said it sounded like goodbye, and Margaret felt panic flutter in her chest. "What will you do?" Sam was quiet for a moment. "There is a ranch about 20 miles south of Oatman. They are looking for hands. I thought I might sign on for a while, earn some money, maybe save up enough to buy some land of my own." 20 miles is not so far," Margaret said, trying to keep her voice casual. Sam looked at her, and she saw everything she was feeling reflected in his eyes. "No," he agreed. "It is not so far at all." They rode into Oatman 3 days later. The town was built into the side of a mountain, a collection of wooden buildings clinging to the steep slopes. The main street was crowded with wagons and horses, men in dusty mining clothes, the occasional well-dressed businessman picking his way carefully around mud puddles. The sound of a piano drifted from one of the saloons, competing with the clang of the blacksmith's hammer and the shouts of teamsters loading supplies. Tom's brother, Walter, ran a general store on the main street. He was an older, grayer version of Tom, with the same kind eyes. When Margaret introduced herself and explained how she knew Tom, Walter's weathered face split into a smile. "Any friend of Tom's is family to me," Walter said. "You look like you have had a hard journey." "It has been educational," Margaret said with a tired smile. Walter looked from Margaret to Sam, noting their travel-worn appearance and something else, some connection between them that was obvious even in the way they stood near each other. "You will both stay for supper tonight," he said. "My wife Mary will want to meet you. And we will figure out what comes next." Walter and Mary lived in rooms behind the store, a comfortable space filled with practical furniture and the smell of good cooking. Mary was a small, energetic woman who had traveled west as a mail-order bride 20 years earlier and stayed through everything the frontier could throw at her. She fed them beef stew and fresh bread and strong coffee, asking questions about their journey, exclaiming over the dangers they had faced. "You will stay with us until you find a situation," Mary told Margaret firmly. "We have a spare room. It is not fancy, but it is clean and safe." "I cannot impose," Margaret began, but Mary waved her objections away. Nonsense. You are family now. Besides, I could use help in the store. Walter is not getting any younger, though he will not admit it. If you are willing to work, we can offer you room and board and a small wage. Margaret felt tears threaten again. After so many weeks of uncertainty, the offer of stability and kindness was almost overwhelming. Thank you. Yes. I would be very grateful. Sam stayed for supper, but as the evening wore on, Margaret could feel him preparing to leave. Finally, he stood, thanking Walter and Mary for their hospitality. I should head out, he said. I want to reach the ranch before full dark. You come back anytime, Mary said, hugging him like he was one of her own. Any friend of Margaret's is welcome here. Margaret walked Sam out to the street where Juniper and his horse were tied. The sun was setting, painting the rocky hillsides in shades of gold and red. They stood awkwardly for a moment, two people who had grown close over weeks of travel, suddenly unsure how to say goodbye. Thank you, Margaret said finally, for everything. I would not have made it here without you. Yes, you would have, Sam said. You are stronger than you know. But I am glad I could help. He hesitated, then reached out and took her hand. Margaret, I know the timing is not ideal. You just got here. You are just starting to build a new life. But I need you to know that these past weeks, traveling with you, talking to you, getting to know you, it has meant everything to me. Margaret's heart was pounding. It has meant everything to me too. I am going to take that job at the ranch, Sam said. I am going to work hard and save money. And if it is all right with you, I am going to come visit you when I can, because I would like to see where this goes, if you want that too. I do, Margaret said, and realized it was completely true. She was not afraid anymore. Sam was not Horace Pemberton. Sam had seen her at her worst, dusty and tired and scared, and had treated her with respect and kindness. Sam had listened to her dreams and not tried to diminish them. I want to see where this goes. Sam smiled, a real smile that lit up his whole face. Then I will be back as soon as I can. He squeezed her hand, then mounted his horse. Take care of yourself, Margaret Nolan. You too, Samuel Grant. She watched him ride away down the street until he was lost in the shadows. Then she went back inside where Mary was waiting with a knowing smile. That is a good man, Mary said. Yes, Margaret agreed. He is. The next months were busy ones. Margaret threw herself into work at the general store, learning the inventory, helping customers, keeping the books. She was good with numbers and organization, and Walter increasingly trusted her to handle the business side of things. Mary taught her more about cooking and managing a household, skills that had been handled by servants during Margaret's privileged upbringing, but which she now learned with determination. Oatman was rough and rowdy, full of miners who struck it rich one day and lost everything the next, gamblers and prostitutes and opportunists of every kind. But there was also a community forming, families putting down roots, a school being built, a church holding services in a tent until they could afford a building. Margaret found her place in this community, becoming known as a respectable young woman who worked hard and did not put on airs. Sam came to visit every 2 weeks, riding the 20 miles from the ranch where he worked. Each visit, Margaret felt their connection deepen. They would walk together through the hills above the town, talking for hours. Sam told her about the ranch, about the horses he was training, about his growing savings. Margaret told him about life in Oatman, about the customers at the store, about her dreams for the future. I have been thinking, Margaret said during one of these walks, about 3 months after she arrived in Oatman. Walter has been talking about expanding the store, maybe opening a second location in a smaller mining camp nearby. He asked if I would be interested in running it. That is wonderful, Sam said. You would be good at that. It would mean a real future here, Margaret said. Not just working for someone else, but building something of my own, or partly my own anyway. Walter would keep the majority ownership, but I would have a stake. You should do it, Sam said. You deserve the chance to build something. Margaret stopped walking and turned to face him. They were on a high ridge overlooking the valley, the town spread out below them, small and insignificant against the vast landscape. What about you? What are you building? Sam took a breath. I have been saving money. The ranch foreman likes my work. He has been teaching me about managing a ranch operation, not just working it, and I have been looking at land. There is a parcel about 10 miles from here near a creek. Good water, good grazing. The man who owns it wants to sell. I almost have enough saved to make an offer. Your own ranch, Margaret said, smiling. That is wonderful, Sam. It could be, Sam said. If you were there with me. Margaret's heart stopped. Sam took both her hands in his expression serious and tender. Margaret, I know this is fast. I know you just escaped a situation where you were being pressured into marriage. I do not want to pressure you, but I love you. I have loved you since that first day by the creek when I saw your courage, your determination to keep going no matter what. You inspire me every day. You make me want to be better, to build something worth having. Sam, Margaret whispered, her eyes filling with tears. I am not asking you to give up anything, Sam continued. Run that store for Walter if you want. Build your own business. I would never ask you to be less than you are, but do it as my wife. Build a life with me. Let us create something together. Margaret looked at this man who had become everything to her. Sam, who had protected her when she was vulnerable, who had never tried to control or diminish her, who encouraged her dreams even as he pursued his own. This was nothing like Horace Pemberton's cold calculation. This was love, real and honest and true. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. Sam pulled her into his arms, and they held each other on that ridge above Oatman as the sun set over the desert. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling through tears. I do not have a ring, Sam said, laughing. I should have planned this better. I do not need a ring, Margaret said. I just need you. But Sam was already pulling something from his pocket, a small carved wooden horse. I made this, he said shyly. I have been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. It is not much, but until I can get you a proper ring. Margaret took the little horse, smooth and perfect, in her palm. It is beautiful. I love it. They walked back to town hand in hand as twilight fell. Walter and Mary were delighted by the news, Mary immediately beginning to plan the wedding. It would be small and simple, they decided, held at the church once the building was finished in the spring. That gave them 5 months to prepare, 5 months for Sam to finalize his land purchase and start building a house. Those months flew by in a flurry of activity. Sam bought the land, a beautiful parcel with a year-round creek running through it and views of the mountains in every direction. He spent every spare moment building a house, a modest structure of wood and stone, but sturdy and well-made. Other cowboys from the ranch helped in their free time, and Walter contributed materials at cost from the store. Margaret continued working at the store, saving every penny of her wages. She and Mary spent evenings making curtains and quilts for the new house, practical items that would turn a building into a home. Margaret also wrote a letter to Tom in Colorado, thanking him again for his kindness and telling him about her impending marriage. His response arrived 6 weeks later, congratulating her and saying he was glad she had found happiness. She did not write to her family in Denver. That door had been closed, and she had no desire to reopen it. Her life was here now, with Sam and with the community she had found in Oatman. The wedding took place on a warm April morning in 1884. The church was small but beautiful, built by the community over the winter months. Margaret wore a simple dress of blue cotton, the best she could afford, with wildflowers in her hair that Mary had helped her pick that morning. Sam wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, looking nervous and excited and absolutely perfect. Half the town attended, it seemed. Walter gave Margaret away, his eyes suspiciously bright. Mary wept openly through the whole ceremony. The preacher kept it brief and meaningful, talking about love and partnership and building a life together. When Sam and Margaret exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other, there was not a dry eye in the church. "I love you," Sam whispered as they signed the marriage certificate. "I love you too," Margaret whispered back. The reception was held at the general store, with food and music and dancing that went on until well after dark. Margaret danced with Sam, with Walter, with several of the cowboys from the ranch who had become friends. She laughed more than she had in years, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her and Sam. As the evening wound down, Sam and Margaret rode out to their new home, their ranch, under a sky full of stars. The house was small but sturdy, with 2 rooms that would be enough for now and could be added onto later. Sam had built furniture, simple but functional. Mary had stocked the kitchen with supplies. It was not fancy, but it was theirs. That night, as they lay together in their new bed, Margaret thought about how far she had come. Less than a year ago, she had been standing on a porch in Colorado, reading a telegram that destroyed her old life. She had been terrified and uncertain, with nothing but a horse and a handful of dollars. Now she had a home, a husband she loved, a future full of possibility. "What are you thinking?" Sam asked, running his fingers through her hair. "That I am happy," Margaret said. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "Me too," Sam said. "Your courage brought you here. But it is our love that will keep us here, that will help us build something lasting." "Our courage," Margaret corrected gently. "It took courage for you to help a stranger by the creek. It took courage to open your heart." Sam kissed her forehead. "Then we are a good match. 2 courageous fools who found each other." "The best match," Margaret agreed. They settled into married life with surprising ease. The ranch was small, but Sam had plans to build it up gradually. He worked long days, building fences, breaking horses, tending the small herd of cattle he had purchased with his savings. Margaret continued working at the store, now running the new satellite location in a mining camp 10 miles east of Oatman. She rode there 3 times a week, managing inventory, serving customers, learning the business inside and out. It was hard work, but satisfying. They would come home in the evenings tired and dusty and cook supper together, talking about their days. On Sundays, they would rest, riding out to explore their land, planning where to expand, where to build barns and corrals. They talked about the future, about the family they would have someday, about growing old together in this place they were building. A year after their wedding, Margaret realized she was pregnant. She told Sam one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "A baby," Sam said, his face transforming with joy. "Truly, truly," Margaret said, smiling at his excitement. "In the late fall, the doctor thinks." Sam pulled her into his arms, holding her gently as though she might break. "We are going to be parents. I can hardly believe it." The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was oppressive, and Margaret struggled with sickness and exhaustion. But Sam was attentive and caring, taking on extra work so she could rest more. Mary was a constant source of support and advice, having raised 4 children of her own. The community rallied around them, as frontier communities did, bringing food and offering help. In November, on a cold, clear night, Margaret went into labor. Mary and the doctor attended her, while Sam paced outside, wearing a path in the dirt. It was a long and difficult labor, and there were moments when Margaret wondered if she would survive it. But finally, just before dawn, a baby's cry split the air. "A boy," Mary announced, bringing the baby to Margaret. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Sam was allowed in then, and he came to the bedside with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Sam said, looking at his son with wonder. "You are perfect. Thank you." They named him Thomas Walter Grant, after the two men who had helped Margaret when she needed it most. Little Tommy was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Margaret and Sam fell into the exhausting rhythm of new parenthood, taking turns walking the floor with a crying baby, marveling over every tiny milestone. 18 months later, their daughter was born, a girl with Sam's features and a temperament that suggested she would be every bit as stubborn and determined as her mother. They named her Sarah Mee, and she completed their little family. The ranch grew steadily over the years. Sam proved to be an excellent horseman and rancher, building a reputation for training quality horses that were in demand throughout the territory. Margaret's business expanded too, eventually opening a third store location and employing several people. She became known as a sharp businesswoman who was fair but firm in her dealings. Their children grew up knowing both parents worked hard, that both contributed to the family's success. Tommy showed an early talent for working with animals, following his father around the ranch from the time he could walk. Sarah was fascinated by the stores, learning to count by helping sort inventory, learning to read from the labels on goods. Margaret never heard from her family in Denver. For the first few years, it hurt, a dull ache that would flare up at unexpected moments. But gradually, the pain faded. She had built her own family, one based on love and mutual respect rather than duty and social obligation. She and Sam often talked about how lucky they were to have found each other, to have built this life together. On their 10th anniversary, they stood together on the same ridge where Sam had proposed. The ranch had grown substantially, with a larger house, multiple barns, corrals full of horses. Margaret's store empire had expanded to 5 locations across the territory. Tommy was 9 years old, Sarah was 7, and they had added another son, Daniel, who was 3. "You ever regret it?" Sam asked, his arm around Margaret's waist. "Giving up your old life, the comfort, the security?" Margaret laughed. "Not for a single moment. That was not a life. It was a cage lined with silk. This is living." "It has been a good 10 years, Sam said. "The first 10 of many," Margaret replied, leaning into him. "We have only just begun," and she was right. The years that followed brought challenges and triumphs. The territory became a state in 1912, a momentous occasion they celebrated with the whole community. The stores weathered economic downturns and booms, expanding and contracting as needed. The ranch became one of the most respected horse operations in the region, with buyers coming from as far as California. Their children grew into capable adults. Tommy took over much of the ranch operations, eventually marrying a schoolteacher from Oatman and adding his own children to the family. Sarah showed an unexpected talent for business, taking over management of the stores when Margaret was ready to step back. Daniel became a lawyer, the first in the family to go to university, though he always came home to Arizona. Sam and Margaret grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled from decades of hard work. But they never lost the love and respect that had brought them together by that creek so many years ago. They would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset, holding hands like young lovers. "Your courage inspires me," Sam said one evening, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago. "And your love sustains me," Margaret replied, the response she had developed over the years. It was Sam who died first, at the age of 72, peacefully in his sleep with Margaret beside him. The whole county turned out for his funeral, testament to the respect and affection he had earned. Margaret grieved deeply, but she did not break. Sam had taught her too well about strength and resilience. She lived another 8 years, still sharp and active, still involved in the businesses and the ranch, still a force to be reckoned with. She delighted in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days, about traveling alone across the desert, about the cowboy who had rescued her and stolen her heart. When Margaret died at 80 years old, surrounded by her family, her last words were about Sam. "I see him," she said, smiling. "He is waiting for me." They buried her next to Sam on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The headstone was simple: Margaret Nolan Grant, 1861–1941. She chose courage over comfort and found love in the wilderness. At the funeral, Tommy told his children and grandchildren about their grandmother, about the privileged young woman who had given up everything rather than marry without love, who had traveled alone across dangerous country, who had built an empire through hard work and intelligence. "She taught us that courage is not the absence of fear," Tommy said. "It is doing what is right despite the fear. She taught us that love is not ownership but partnership. She taught us that we can build something meaningful, something lasting, if we are willing to work for it." And the family she and Sam had built, the legacy of courage and love they left behind, continued for generations. Their great-great-grandchildren still run the ranch and the stores in Oatman, still tell the story of Margaret Nolan, who was disowned for refusing a rich suitor, and Samuel Grant, who said her courage inspired him, and how together they built a life, a family, and a legacy that endured. In the end, Margaret's choice to refuse Horace Pemberton, to walk away from comfort and security in favor of freedom and self-determination, had been vindicated 1,000 times over. She had not just found love. She had found herself, her strength, her purpose. And in finding those things, she had built something far more valuable than any social position or family name could have given her. The story of Margaret and Sam became part of Arizona folklore, told and retold in different versions. But the heart of it always remained the same: courage recognized and rewarded, love freely given and returned, and two lives that became more together than they ever could have been apart. Their ranch still stands today, though it has changed and grown over the decades. If you visit on a quiet evening when the sun is setting over the mountains and painting the sky in shades of orange and red, you might almost hear their voices on the wind. Margaret's laugh, bright and free. Sam's steady voice, full of love and pride. The sound of a life well lived, of choices bravely made, of a love that conquered all obstacles and endured beyond death itself. And if you stand on that ridge where Sam proposed, where they celebrated their 10th anniversary, where their descendants still go to remember and honor them, you can see what they built. Not just the physical structures of ranch and businesses, but something more: a legacy of courage. A testament to the power of choosing your own path, even when that path is hard and uncertain. A reminder that sometimes the greatest adventure begins with a single word: no. Margaret said no to a life that would have crushed her spirit. She said yes to uncertainty, to hardship, to the terrifying freedom of making her own choices. And in that yes, she found everything she had ever needed: love, purpose, family, home. The Wild West was not an easy place for anyone, and certainly not for a woman alone. But it was also a place where people could reinvent themselves, where courage and determination counted for more than family name or social position, where love could blossom in the most unexpected places. Margaret and Sam's story was one of thousands that played out across the frontier in those years. But it was special in its own way, a perfect meeting of two souls who recognized in each other the qualities they most admired: courage, honesty, determination, love. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and grief. But it also ended with triumph, with children and grandchildren who carried their values forward, with businesses and land that continued to support and employ people, with a love story that inspired everyone who heard it. On a brass plaque at the entrance to the main ranch house, installed by their grandchildren, are words taken from their vows: love freely given, partnership honored, a life built together through courage and faith. Margaret and Samuel Grant, 1883–1941. And beneath that, added later by a romantic great-granddaughter, your courage inspires me. Your love sustains me. Forever. The sun sets over Arizona every evening, just as it did when Margaret and Sam sat on their porch and watched it together. The desert blooms in spring, a riot of color against the red rocks. The creek still runs through the ranch, providing life-giving water to the land. And somewhere in the wind and the sky and the very earth itself, their love story continues, eternal as the mountains, enduring as the desert, bright as the stars that wheel overhead in the clear western night. This is the story of Margaret Nolan, who was disowned for refusing a rich suitor, and Samuel Grant, who said her courage inspired him. This is the story of how they found each other in the vast wilderness of the American West, and how they built a love that lasted a lifetime and echoed through generations. This is a story of courage and choice, of hardship overcome, of love triumphant. And like all the best love stories, it is also true. Not in every detail, perhaps, but in the ways that matter most. The courage it takes to be true to yourself. The joy of finding someone who sees and loves the real you. The satisfaction of building something meaningful with your own hands. The deep contentment of growing old with the person you love most in the world. Margaret's journey from that porch in Colorado to her final resting place on an Arizona hillside was long and hard. But every step was her choice, made in freedom, guided by courage. And that made all the difference.